And it's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Ajay Sharma of the University of Georgia, USA, who is presenting on Neoliberal Ontology of Teaching, a critique.
Thank you, Dr. Finch. Thank you everyone for coming to the session. I'll begin by introducing myself in Hindi. मेरा नाम अजय शर्मा है, मैं यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ जॉर्जिया में पढ़ाता हूँ और मेरा मकसद हिंदी में अपना परिचय देने का ये है कि जिससे कि कोई आपके सवाल हैं हिंदी में तो उसको जो आप हिंदी में व्यक्त कर सकते हैं तो हिंदी में ही हम बात कर सकते हैं। ये ज़रूरी नहीं कि ये जो बातें हो रही हैं यहाँ पे वो केवल इंग्लिश के ज़रिए ही हों। Now let me switch to the professional discourse. And so I'm Ajay Sharma. I'm at University of Georgia, and Dr. Batra's talk segues very nicely with the kind of issues I'm going to raise. Her concerns over managerial discourse and the neoliberal imprint on how education and knowledge is being presented vibes very well with the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about. So let me just pull up my presentation. Okay. All right. All right, so at University of Georgia, we have a small group which is engaged in understanding neoliberalism and how it's impacting the world of education. So this presentation is an outcome of that work, which we are conducting in different dimensions. The topic that I'm going to talk about is of immense relevance to our work, that kind of work that I do. I'm in teacher education there, and we prepare students to go in middle grades at middle schools in Georgia, and we find a profound disconnect between the kind of discourse that exists in colleges of education and the kind of world our students, when they get into schools, the kind of world they find themselves in. And one of the ways this disconnect makes itself felt to students is the way teaching and teachers are talked about in corridors of schools and the kind of language in which act of teaching is presented. So it felt very important for us to interrogate the kind of ontology, the kind of language, the kind of categories that we have assumed in our discourse when you talk about teachers and teaching and education and learning. So the kind of discourse has become naturalized, and it has become naturalized to an extent that it has become very difficult to interrogate the foundational assumptions. And I think the kind of work that we want to do is to probe the foundational assumptions of mainstream conceptions of teachers and teaching. So my presentation, this is how I've conceptualized. I'm going to present an issue which is of particular relevance in American context. But I strongly feel that this issue, which has made itself, which has determined the lives of teachers for more than a decade in America, is going to come to India pretty very soon. I mean, the footfalls can be heard even now. So I think that issue, even if it's posed in an American context, there's a lot we can draw from, and then we can translate and see how it's going to present itself in an Indian context. And so that being said, so I'll present the issue, but before that I'll talk about a little bit about ontology, so that you can understand the kind of lens I'm going to bring forth to understand teachers and teaching. And then I'm going to, after presenting the issue, Then I'm going to talk about how this issue is being understood in America, the kind of solution that are being posed to the problem that has been constructed, and what does the kind of the language in which solutions are being presented, what does it tell us about how teachers and teaching are being understood. And then I'm going to make connections with neoliberalism. Not to draw a causal connection, but to suggest that the kind of ontology neoliberalism talks about, is based upon, has strong resonance with the ontology that you see in the way we talk about teachers and teaching. And then some implications follow from that kind of ontology, which I'm going to discuss. And then after critique, a question comes that what next? So I'm going to present a program of research that hopefully will take in years to come. All right, so I read political theory and political philosophy, and anybody who's a student of political theory would notice that there's a profound dissatisfaction among political theorists in the way in which modernity talks about human subject. Many people have called it an ontological turn. In the sense, political theorists are now increasingly invested in questioning, interrogating the ways in which human subject is talked about. Now, the different ways in which human subject is conceptualized, and in response to modern understanding of human subject. In modernity, human subject is presented as a coherent, self-contained self, in distance with the context, in distance with the communicated with power, and they are always hegemonic, and they exclude alternative conceptions of self and subjectivity. So among post-structuralists, you find that people are very reluctant to conceptualize human subject. However, on the other hand, there is also this strong discourse in the mainstream, and here I'm referring to neoliberalism, where human subject is conceptualized in very strong terms. When I say strong, I mean to say that in very definite, specific terms that are positive in nature, where humans are conceptualized as self-contained, interest-maximizing, rational people. Neoliberal thought has a very strong ontology about social ontology, and in which human subjects are conceptualized in very clear, positive terms. Worker, so you have some innate abilities. The machine that you possess has some innate abilities, and then through education investment, you increase those abilities. And work is recast as economic conduct. So, if this is, and I'm going to, I favor the neoliberalism as governmentality as is my lens, and so if that is the lens, then and you can see that there are broad overlaps between how neoliberalism conceptualizes human subject and workers, and how teachers and teaching are being talked about in education in the mainstream discourse in America these days. Anyway, so even if there's an overlap, the question in any research is, so what? The so what question that traumatizes all of us who do research. And so my response is that if you see then the overlaps, you can see that the dominant ontology of teaching these days is substantivist, is positive, and very strong in its orientation. And there's a strong compatibility or mutuality with neoliberalism. I'm saying I'm not drawing a causal link here. And what you find in America and also increasingly in India is because of this kind of ontology, it encourages commodification and marketization of teaching. So you have increasingly you have temporary teachers because you teacher as an economic worker, you are in possession of your own machine. There are no long-term commitments. So you can go anywhere because you possess teaching capital. So in favor of against having a long-term commitment, you find temporary arrangements between the worker and the workplace. And teachers are being presented as service providers, and the language is that parents are consumers in the marketplace. They should have school choice, and they should be able to move their kids from low-performing schools to high-performing schools, and state should support it through various means, including vouchers. So you find the increasing trend towards commodification and marketization of teaching. And another thing that you find is, which appears very innocuous on the surface, is what I call teaching evangelism. I was very recently I find that this kind of evangelism is also making its impression in America, in India. And when I talk about evangelism, teaching evangelism, what I'm saying is that in America there's thanks to Teach for America like programs, there's an increasing belief that all it takes, all you need to improve American education, especially education in those urban schools where students are lagging, where students are not coming up to par. All you need to improve education in such schools are bright, motivated teachers. So the problem is, if we can catch these bright, motivated graduates in elite colleges and somehow can inspire them to go to these urban schools, they can work miracles. And all it takes is those kind of teachers. So that kind of evangelism is becoming very, very influential in American education discourse. And I find that it has made its entry even in India. There is an organization called Teach for India, which is based on the similar model, where it's assumed that if you're from Delhi University, you can go and teach in Rani Piparia or any other school, and you can work wonders. So, as anybody who has taught in schools or has worked in schools, especially schools in rural areas or poor areas, and I've worked in Hoshangabad for many years, I know, and even in America, teaching evangelism doesn't work. Those bright kids who enter into those schools don't stay for more than a year or two. And the best thing that Teach for America does is it polishes their CV, where they can tell future employers that they have been to impoverished schools and done wonders. Now they're ready to take their position in the corporate world. And it does nothing and a lot of studies have shown that it does nothing to those kids that they were trying to educate. Also, it pushes, in the mainstream discourse, it pushes ecological issues, education ecology issues to the periphery. Like for excellence to sustain, you need systems that nurture that assistance, that nurture that excellence, those support systems. So people don't talk about that kind of ecology anymore.
Has been trying to catch your eye for a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. All right. So that has always been a problem with me. Thank you. So, I'll just stop my presentation here. Any questions? Thank you very much. And questions and comments?
Thank you. Contributor over here, first of all, then there, and then here.
Thank you, Ajay. You gave lots of food for thought, but Yes, I'm so sorry to say I didn't receive answers. I mean, there's such deep dilemmas. If you, let's say, okay, teacher accountability can't be talked in simple terms, simplistic terms, but what do we talk about when we talk about teacher accountability? And if we don't talk about it, then we get into another ravine. I mean, teachers just going and taking tuition classes, teachers subletting their work, and I mean a whole lot happening, which is deeply, deeply disturbing. Then okay, causation, simple causation cannot be linked between teaching and learning, but there has to be some deep link. Otherwise, you have the market coming and telling us just dump these teachers, and there's technology. Why do we need teachers at all? So whenever we get into any of these things, well, teachers, teacher accountability, or linkages between teaching and learning, or even student outcomes, we have to be very careful and then come up with, okay, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this is wrong. What is right, please? I'm sorry, but I'm deeply disturbed by all this. My name is Anshu Malla. You would recall some communication,
Yes, I totally sympathize with your problem here. I would not discount the gravity of the problem. I have experience with government schools, especially in Madhya Pradesh, and I know what you're talking about. But the fact that a problem exists does not mean that we should rush in with solutions that lead to implications that are very dangerous in the long term. And what I find even in India is this steady deprofessionalization of teaching that's happening because how you present the problem, and then if you cast the problem in terms of teacher accountability, then the solution comes that we should make teachers accountable. I would encourage you to, so that's the argument, that we should try to conceptualize teaching in relational terms, when we focus on what's going on between the teacher and the student rather than the teacher as the problem. Once we have a relational ontology, then perhaps we can come up with better ways to address the situation. The thing is tendency both in US and India to have reform on the cheap. The fact that problem exists means that it needs a solution, but politicians, I find both in America and India, find solutions that are very problematic. They want to have reform bills that are very cheap. So one cheap way is to just increase pressure on the teachers, and that does not work.
Thank you. There's a contributor right at the back who put their hand up previously.
Yeah.
Hello Ajay, this is Kuldeep here. Being a student of philosophy and elementary education, I came to know that there should be some harmony between ontological assumption and epistemological assumptions. So as far as your presentation is concerned, so my question is related to the methodology. You have taken certain ontological assumptions about teaching, but to study them, you have adopted, it seems to me, you have adopted a contradictory epistemology. For example, you have applied econometric methodology, and it seems to me as if you are assuming that teaching is something which is measurable, quantifiable. So how do you think, if you can shed some light on this aspect?
No, well, that's not what I'm recommending, to adopt econometric methods to assess teaching. That's what I'm critiquing, that these are the methods that are increasingly being used and we should move away from them.
Okay, colleague here first, and then we've got one there, and then lady here.
Okay. Ajay, very briefly, because a large number of years and across nations, it has been demonstrated that all economic development leads to growth in inequalities. So could one extend that to argue that all interventions in education which are improve the education system will invariably lead to a growth in inequality between the good schools and the bad schools. And about Hoshangabad, I'll ask you later.
Okay. Well, I'm not against measurement per se. I think there is a problem, and we cannot argue that let's not look at the effects of teaching, because that's not a tenable position. What I'm arguing for is that since teaching is such a complex phenomena, we should have equally complex instruments to assess it. And if you look at econometric literature, in the end, even the economists argue that those who are using production function, they say that this instrument should not be used in isolation. And one recommendation is that you can use a production function, but I think it's also good. They should always be used along with principles assessment of teachers. So that is saying that local people who are involved in the situation would have a better idea of what the effects of teaching are, what's the nature of teaching, and in fact that is where I find the local systems are responding. They're saying that that econometric methods would not work. Let's have, if you want to do that, let's also use non-economic methods of assessing teacher performance. So that's where I stand. Piketty is someone who I have come across only recently. I have not thought about that issue. So that gives me food for thought. How Piketty's argument would apply in education, especially in terms of educational inequality. You've given me some ideas to think ahead.
Okay, now in view of the very pertinent comment made about our dinner, I'm going to ask our last two contributors from the floor to be very brief and to the point in their questions. So, this gentleman in this corner over here, I think, who put up his hand. No? Is there anyone there who wants to contribute? In which case we have a lady here on my right.
I'll make this really brief, and it's more a comment than a question. And I think Professor Batra talked about how culture interrogated to reconstruct knowledge is one possible way of countering what you presented as a neoliberal push onto education. But I think the one thing that should not be ignored, and I think it's largely being ignored, is the access of technology in this whole neoliberal push. You asked a question very briefly earlier about what is the role of the web and the information and so on. Technology is used to now accumulate knowledge, to centralize knowledge, to exercise power, and it's doing it in ways that we cannot and have not even begun to appreciate. And all of these pushes of, measuring teachers, get new things into the classroom, transform curriculum, are all resting on technology as similarly, this neutral idea has actually just sort of been co-opted by technology, and people who are co-opting it and using it are anything but neutral. Capitalist interventions who are actually seeking to control, exercise power. I think as educationists, educators, practitioners, we cannot overlook this. I just wanted to make that submission.
Yes.
There was a lady right at the back, and I think we've just got time for her contribution.
I'll just say that Paul Davies makes this argument that where he sees technology as a handmaiden, that he makes an argument that technology is in service of neoliberalism.
I'll just rephrase the first question a bit. In the light of teacher accountability, since that was the crux of your presentation, and Professor Batra very briefly referred, to treating teacher as an individual entity removed from the system, the problems that arises from that. In the context of your own Hoshangabad experiment, I wanted to know your position, your perspective on this issue.
I'm sorry. So, what do you want me to focus on?
This issue of teacher accountability. The teacher as an an individual entity responsible for something remote from the system.
Yes, so in Hoshangabad, we tried to create an ecology, a support system where excellence in teaching could be nurtured and could be sustained. So though we did focus on a lot of our efforts were in direction of improving teacher as in terms of their knowledge and understanding, but there were a lot of interventions where we were creating systems where teachers could come together on platforms on a regular basis, and that could share experience with each other, so a support system could come up where such excellence could be continued over a long period of time.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, and thank you, contributors from the floor. We'll conclude this session now.